What is going on, guys? Today I am going to hastily tell you about my comic book collection. Let's go. Number one, the Incal, and I won't be counting for the rest of the video. This is a French graphic novel. It starts off as a science fiction book, but it gradually transforms into a spiritual book. And the art by Mebius is fantastic. It's very detailed, very old school, came out in the 80s, but it still holds up because of the very imaginative artwork. It's just very powerful, and it's a deep story, and it's action packed, and it's mind boggling. And we're moving on. Scott Pilgrim, the complete series. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the 2010 movie Scott Pilgrim versus the World. That movie is based on this. Oh, crap. Scott Pilgrim is a love story, and I have the black and white edition, but it's also available in color. The art style is very cool. The story, it's not cringy at all, because it's written by someone who's actually like a proper geek and not a pretender. And the art is fantastic, and the story is very deep. And across these 6 books, you don't just get to know Scott Pilgrim and Ramona Flowers, you get to know everyone in his community and all his friends, and the ending is very satisfying. I recommend this. 2 for 1. Batman Arkham Asylum is a psychological thriller written by Grant Morrison, who wrote another book that I own. The art is very unsettling, very shocking. It shows a Batman that you've never seen before, but you've definitely seen pieces of since. Like, this book was very influential on his mythology, and the artwork is insane. As I said, Dave McKean, you'll hear that name again. Just look at this art. It is just very interesting, and I think it enhances the story. A lot of people don't agree, but I think the Joker that we get here is very pure. And Kingdom Come is a more straightforward DC story, illustrated by the legend Alex Ross. Shout out to the authors, man. Grant Morrison, Mark Waid, shout out to the authors, man. But yes, the artwork in this is super realistic. Alex Ross, he's a legendary painter. His artwork makes this book look like it's a movie come to life. Okay. It's a brawler. It's a story that involves basically every superhero. Like, there are tons of superheroes in this story, not just the big dogs, but yeah, it is an epic story. It's an epic tale. I believe you see this version of Superman in one of the CW crossovers. And yeah, I recommend both of these books, and I feel like they both go together because of their altering approaches to classic source material. Moving on. Black Hole by Charles Burns is a book about a group of teens in a small town that is suddenly struck by a mysterious disease that manifests in grotesque scars on people's bodies. And the disease disfigures people, and this disease is also transmitted by sex. Basically, I'm not going to flip through this because there's a lot of nudity in this book. It's basically a biographical book about Charles's life at the start of the HIV pandemic back in the 80s. It's a very at the beginning of the book, I don't really like the characters. Like no one is really likable, but by the end, I get really attached to everyone. And the more people start getting the disease, like it makes the book sad. And it also the hopelessness that they feel is also kind of like what it is to be a young person trying to survive in the world. So I love this book. Planetary. Planetary is a book about a secret organization called Planetary that's trying to prevent another secret organization from removing all the magic from the world and all the superpowers. Basically, the evil secret organization is killing all the superheroes, like all the superheroes that we know, like in pop culture, like Superman, Wonder Woman, all those. Like they're basically, and by doing that, they're removing all the hope from the world. Like they're making the world, a darker place. So Planetary is just trying to stop that evil organization, and they're also trying to uncover all the mystery in the world and all the wonder. So really, this book is basically like all about shout outs. Basically, like, see this hammer? You know this hammer, as you recognize it as Mjolnir from Marvel's Thor, but this is a DC book, right? Nah, this book shouts out superheroes from every company, like everywhere. So yeah, it's a mystery. It starts off as a mystery book, and then it just turns into a like, look at this. Okay, here's an example. See that cape? That's Superman's cape. That's what. Okay, I'm spoiling. I'm gonna spoil the story, but I have to spoil it to tell you why it's amazing. That's Green Lantern's. That represents Green Lantern's lantern. Those are Wonder Woman's glaives, and that's represents Superman's cape. So the evil organization killed the baby Superman when he arrived in the farm. They nuked that Wonder Woman's secret island, and I think they killed the Green Lantern or whatever. They destroyed the lantern. So Planetary has to hold the evil organization accountable, because if they didn't do that, the world in this book would have had Superman. They would have had a Justice League. They would have been protected, you see. So it's a very, it also shouts out different story, like it's shouting out like olden day action books. Like this is how books, it's just all about shout outs and references, like, and throwbacks, and like, yeah, like there you've got a shout out to you can just guess who that looks like. All right, and the solid artwork all around, and yeah, like you just see a lot of fake versions of superheroes that you already know, but it's trying to tell a story without violating copyrights and stuff, and it works. Like, this is a very compelling story written by Warren Ellis, who also wrote Transmetropolitan. Okay, this is about a guy called Spider Jerusalem. All right, this dude is a reporter in a chaotic city that is actually very. This book came out in the 90s. I mean, it was very okay. Whoa, it definitely predicted a lot of what we have today. I mean, it's a futuristic city, but it's still realistic. Like, you've got people doing genetic splicing. You've got, anyways, Spider Jerusalem. I hope I don't show any more titties. Spider Jerusalem is just a controversial figure. His news stories. I thought this book would be boring, just following a reporter, but this guy is he's actually a badass. I mean, just look. I mean, he doesn't like the people. He doesn't like the people at this bar. He spends the beginning of the book. Okay, before the book, he was retired. All right, but once he gets the call to get back into reporting, he just nukes this diner that he didn't like. Like, it's just a very crazy, unhinged book. Spider is a character who obviously is gonna lose all that hair. He's just a very unhinged character, and you just see him view the world through his cynical lenses. No pun definitely intended, but it's also very beautiful. Like some of his writing, some of his reporting, like his articles are genuinely like well written and just powerful. Anyways, moving on. I've got 2 books of these, and he's definitely controversial in his world. He's trying to get to the bottom of things, and he does sometimes, and other times he's stopped by corruption. It's a very realistic book. So Transmet, yeah. Locke Key is it's now a Netflix show. I didn't get the first. The person who sold me this didn't have the first volume, so I had to get the rest of them. But it's a young adult comic book, horror comic book. It's about these magical keys that each grant the wielder of the key special abilities. The artwork the artwork is amazing. Okay, that was kind of horrific, but it's just a very creative book. Just check it out. There's this key. There's one of the keys. This is a spoiler for season 2. One of the keys is a mirror that can change your race. So these keys basically grant the kids special abilities, and they have to use it to fight evil. But like I said, it's about a family. It's about siblings. It's not about a group of strangers. It's about siblings. A single family. They've dealt with tragedy, as you can see, right? But the keys take them on a journey. I can't say more than that because I'm running out of time. But yeah, Locke Key. Honestly, the comics, I feel like the villain is kind of too powerful. I feel like the Netflix show, this bastard, like he's just too powerful. Like he runs circles around the heroes. I feel like the Netflix show nerfs him enough. So yeah. Okay, I'm gonna rush. Jimmy Corrigan, Smartest Kid on Earth. It's a very unique book about a dude, a young guy. He's very young, but he looks like an old man. Even when he was a kid, in the flashbacks to his childhood, he looks like an old man. Yeah, as you can see. It's just a book about a dude basically just living his life, but he's very awkward, and there's tons of awkward moments in this book. He meets his long lost father, and he has to come to terms with it. I haven't finished this book. That's where I am. But it's incredibly difficult to read. Like the reading direction, the reading direction changes. Like sometimes even in a single page, the reading direction will change. But the art style is very old school on purpose. It's not an old book, as you can see. But yeah, it's a deep book if you're looking for a change of pace. Blankets is an autobiographical book about Craig Thompson's life. The art in this is fantastic. Like even though it's not in color, I feel like it's unique. Like the art is just special, and it goes very well with like the nature of the story. Like it's I should actually review it at the same time as another one, a similar book that I own called Essex County. These are basically about life in America. Well, this happens in Canada, I believe. But it's just about slices of people's lives. This one covers like a whole plethora of characters through different time periods on top of that. But this is just Craig's life. Essex County's art. Okay, this was the wrong page to open, but the art, the true art isn't that much of a step up. Okay, this is what Essex County looks like, and it looks very crude. But the art in this it makes the story more it adds to the story. Like, like, this dude looks old. Like, you could have drawn an old man more realistically, but this just makes him look even more fragile. And yeah, basically, Essex County, its power lies in the small moments, in the quiet moments. As you just look at that page, the quiet moments that every single character goes through, and it just stacks these quiet moments up to a single powerful thing that will move you. Like, I was moved. This book moved me to tears. Blankets story isn't as moving, but it's a lot like Scott Pilgrim. It's just more serious in tone, and the art just does more impressive things. Just look at that. It's just more creative. It explores this guy's faith. He falls in love. It shows his childhood, and it just shows him grow up. Like, you also see scenes when he was a kid. Like, that's him. And just, yeah, man, it's just like both of these books they just reinforce the idea that life isn't easy, and comic books aren't all about, superheroes. All-Star Superman, written by Grant Morrison. Hey, why do I have so many Grant Morrison books? This is a book about where Superman basically gets cancer, and we are watching his last days. So it just shows Superman as around the time this book came out. I think Superman comics were kind of like, you weren't really seeing him doing heroic things. Like, like it definitely restores a lot of old school Superman tropes, like how he acts dumb when he's Clark Kent. Like, this is how he looks. He looks so shabby. But then when he's Superman, obviously he's a badass. I mean, it puts his underwear on the outside again. Okay, I actually think this came out when that was still a thing, so that's not a point. But basically, this book is it paints Superman like it's like, how you feel reading the Bible when Jesus is about to die, and you're like, it's moving to that point. You can feel it moving to the point where Superman's about to die. So it just shows him doing amazing feats just before he dies, and each of them is just impressive. Like, you see it highlight like his intelligence. Like, Superman isn't really known for being like a genius, but this book shows him being like a genius, like an actual genius. So it's pretty great. I mean, he arm wrestles like some gods. He gives Lois Lane some of his powers, and they get to fly around together. It's a very sad, it's a very moving book as well, in its own way. Not as moving as the others. And the art, like, you may not like the art style. Like, it's a very acquired taste. Okay, like the way Superman looks, but it's a fantastic book. Mr. Miracle, I've got the very first Mr. Miracle, the one where he was introduced, and the most recent Mr. Miracle book that came out in 2017. Mr. Miracle was created by Jack Kirby in the 70s, and as such, this book is cheesy as hell. Alright? Every sentence in this book ends in an exclamation mark, or leads up to one. Literally. Like, it's such an old school book. Basically, Mr. Miracle is a superhero who can escape from any trap, and it's about that's why I like him. He's not trying to save anyone, he's just trying to save himself. I find that very relatable. And the old school one is very cheesy, but it's also very colorful, and the art by Jack Kirby is just fantastic. All right, very colorful, very imaginative. Okay, The 2017 Mr. Miracle takes a very serious take on Mr. Miracle. As a matter of fact, it does the 9 panel that Watchmen does, like, but it's very gritty, it's very raw, it's very real. It shows the toll that being a superhero takes on a human being, and you see him go through trauma, you see him stressed out, you see him drunk, you see Mr. Miracle, you see him suffering, man. You see him going through things. You see him losing people. Just look at this shot. This is not a fun shot like the first book. The first book was just lighthearted and exciting, like, hey, gang, how do we get out of this? But this book, very super serious. I like them both. They go very well together. Preacher, I didn't read that. Probably never will. Preacher is a badass 90s comic book about a preacher who gets the ability to use the voice of God, and he can basically command people to do whatever he says, and they cannot deny him. So he uses this to go on an epic of adventure that spans heaven, earth, hell, and it's got very solid artwork. The faces, man, the drawings of the faces was very detailed. The covers by Glenn Fabry, whose name should be on the cover but isn't. Like, the covers for every single chapter are extremely detailed. As you can see. So yeah, it's just a very badass story. Fun characters. And the most hilarious villain of all time. This dude, I forgot his name, but this dude is the funniest villain of all time. Like, I feel like he's the final villain. This was also turned into a TV series like in 2014. Season 1 was amazing. As the show progressed, it just got more and more boring. The Arrival is actually not a graphic novel, it's a picture book. Well, not, this is just the cover. This is like, anyways, it's like what Black Hole does. Black Hole's cover also has random photos of people. It has no dialogue at all. There's no text bubbles. It's all just pictures. Okay. It's about a man who has to leave his family behind and move to a fantastical city. Well, I think the whole world is fantastical, but the city that he moves to is just, it takes everything up to 11. Like, he goes on a ship, but the artwork is, anyways, he goes on a ship and he arrives in this big city with a foreign language that has foreign creatures, magical creatures, and he has to get used to living in the city. Basically, it basically is all just a metaphor of the experience of being an immigrant, just moving to a magical city, and he has to figure out a way to survive. I mean, it's got gorgeous art, basically. Okay, like, the artwork in this is just look at that. Just look at that. This is probably the best thing I own, like, literally in my whole life. The Invisibles is an epic novel, as you can see, written by Grant Morrison. Now, this is a book about a group of misfits, a group of misfit young people who decide to join up and take on a mysterious organization, an evil organization, basically. It's basically The Matrix, okay? The Matrix ripped off this book, but it dumbed everything down. Like, Grant Morrison was pissed that they didn't rip off enough, because what The Matrix did past the first movie was just, it was trash. Like, it could have, anyways. It's a psychedelic story. It starts off Um, it starts off like a mystery book. It's kind of like Planetary. It starts off mystery. There's a lot of things that don't make sense. Then it turns into like an action book, like with guns and and then it finishes on a crazy note. Like literally the last portion of the book, it literally doesn't make sense. Like I don't think I'm describing this book very well, but I think everyone should read this book. Every like serious comic book fan, just to experience what the Matrix could have been if had it like been more compelling. You know. Well, I'm not seeing any good pages. Like every time I open it, I see garbage. Okay, yeah, these are the Invisibles. That this is the group of people, and they're all kind of weird and unusual. But yeah, they use psychic powers, they use force, they use everything to fight this evil organization. And yeah. Saga, probably the best looking cover I have. I'm gonna pause before I turn the pages because this book has tons of sex and nudity. Alright, it's basically an epic, it's basically Game of Thrones in space. It's basically about this. See the person holding up this hand. It's about this person going from being inside the womb to being a little girl. So it shows a large span. And this is the first half of the saga. The first half of her life. It's a space, fantasy, magical sci-fi story. Now I'm gonna just show you bits and pieces, but I have to pause every single time. I don't want to see any nudity. Alright, there's fairies and there's, unicorns and there's people with TVs for heads. And I just showed some nudity. Anyways, we're moving on. It's about a forbidden love, between a horny man, as you can see, he's got horns, and a winged lady, and they're actually fighting a war against each other. But they end up having a kid, this kid, who has wings and a horn, and they have to survive as a family because this girl's existence can end the war, this magical science fiction war, and she's not allowed to exist. So they spend the whole book just trying to protect her. And yeah, and it's just got very great art and creative ideas. And yeah, it's a very entertaining book. This is probably the most entertaining book like ever. Like this is, yeah, Saga. Anyways, I recommend Saga. It's just epic, and it's long, and it's creative. All right, I'm not gonna even open this. Well, maybe I just will. Walking Dead. You already know what to expect with The Walking Dead. One thing you may not expect is that the covers are really ugly. The covers look terrible. The covers are just horrible. But the artwork inside, fantastic. It's all black and white. I didn't know this. I thought The Walking Dead was in full color. But yes, it's a very gripping story, but you already know what to expect with The Walking Dead. Just, is it worth reading? I think it's worth reading. I honestly think it's worth reading because The Walking Dead story is very solid, actually. Like, it's a very solid story. It's worth reading, even if you're up to date with the TV show. It's just very beautiful art. Alright, we're getting to the end of this. Animal Man. This is not the best. This is written by Jeff Lemire, the guy who wrote Essex County. Remember that book that I said was moving? The dude ended up working for DC and writing Animal Man. Now this is about a dude who can what are Animal Man's powers? He can basically, any animal that he can think of, he can take on their powers. So he can fly if he decides to take on a bird spirit. He can be super strong if he decides to think of a bear. He can, you get the point, right? He was like a goofy character until Grant Morrison, the guy who wrote The Invisibles and that horrific Batman book. He basically took over Animal Man in the 80s and he made him like a compelling character. So this is a 2011 Animal Man. I read the Grant Morrison Animal Man. That's like the #1 Animal Man story, and then some of it even happens in South Africa. This book, it's not great. It's not that great. The art is a bit underwhelming. Like, the faces are kind of trash. The art is pretty weak in general, but it's very horrific. One thing that Grant Morrison introduced to the series back in the 80s was horrific art. Like, Animal Man takes on some of the scariest, most unimaginable villains. Like, it's just, and the things that happens to him, like he takes on like gorilla strength, and look at what it does to his body. Ah, God. Anyways, this is just a very horrific and disturbing book. I recommend it. Next, we're getting there. Next is American Vampire. This, do I have the first one? I believe this is the first one. Nope, this is the first one. Written by Scott Snyder, drawn by that dude, and Stephen King. Stephen King, who wrote It, The Dark Tower, The Shining. Stephen King is just a legend. So I believe Scott Snyder asked Stephen King to write like one of these like blurbs, but Steve was like, just let me write part of the book, bro. Let me write the intro, you know. So American Vampire it's basically a vampire novel, but it just restores them. It restores vampires to like what they like. This came out around the time of Twilight, when vampires were like seen as weak and effeminate and sexy. This basically just the whole point of this book was to just restore them to what they used to be. So it's just a very dope story. Stephen King writes the parts that happen in the 1800s, and Scott Snyder after this book, Scott Snyder just writes it on his own. Like, Stephen King just provides like the backstory, and it's just beautiful. It's just Stephen King is the reason, is good. His writing is just strong enough to just sell this book. Like, it's just a fantastic book, and the vampires are not sexy or sparkling or glowing. Bone is basically about what can I say, like a newspaper comic character who ends up leaving a small town, and he stumbles into a fantasy world. Like, so he's like a joke character, like, you know, like Snoopy, or you know, like those comic strips in newspapers, but he ends up leaving where he comes from and going into like a vast world. So he ends up in a fantasy story. It's an epic story. He has to save a princess in a kingdom, and blah 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 blah, and there's fantastical creatures, which, yeah, it's just a very funny story. Like, he doesn't belong. He's a bone. He's a bone. He has two of his cousins who are always making mischief in the town, and they are very obviously cartoon characters, like from a like lesser like version of comic books, and the way they clash is just very entertaining. Like, I just love Bone, and I still haven't finished it. But yes, there's a color version. I don't know why I didn't get that. 100 Bullets is a crime series, but it's just full of tons and tons of characters, and it's a very intricate story. I hope I don't show any nudity here, but it's just very badass. It's very hardcore. It's like Sin City. It's full of tough guys. There's a lot of action. It's just a great story, and the artwork is just very distinct. Eduardo Risso's art is just, it's very distinct, and the dialogue, when it switches like between black people and Hispanic people, like the slang that they use, like it's very realistic. It's very realistic. I like this, but there are like literally 100 characters in this book, and And yeah, you have to keep track of all those characters and all of their allegiances, and people are always betraying one another. It's a challenge, but it's worth it in the end. 100 bullets. Final two. Hope my phone doesn't die. Watchmen. Watchmen. It is a classic story. Um, you already know what Watchmen is about, but the comic book is better, infinitely better than the films that you got. It's got 9 panel cutouts. I'm panicking because I feel like my phone is about to die. But in this I got this. This is like an original like 1980s edition. Basically, like there's tons of symbolism. Anytime someone is thinking a thought, it means more than one thing. Like, it's just a very deep book, and it's just very epic. So if you enjoyed the movie and the TV series, definitely give this a read. And finally, my favorite comic book series of all, The Sandman. This is probably the most creative thing I've read in my life. It's about a dude called Dream. He is the manifestation of the concept of dreams. So book starts off and he gets captured. This is what he looks like. He's pale. He's got dark hair. And when he gets captured, actually I'm gonna spoil the story, but it's just about his adventures and it's his journey as a person. Well, he's not a person. He's an endless, right? He's got 6 other siblings. There's dream, death, desire, destiny, destruction, delirium, and despair. I think that's all of them. But they are all like concepts that just, like, death is death, Like, I don't know how to explain it very well, but the covers are by Dave McKean, the guy who did the artwork for that psychotic Batman story. But anyways, like the Sandman, I have the entire collection. My phone better not die. Why should you read the Sandman, guys? You should read the Sandman because it's just very creative. There's another Dave McKean cover. It's just a very creative book. I mean, Dream is the prince of stories. Like, so this book is it's got tons of stories inside. It hops around all sorts of time periods. This is even more epic than, this is probably the most epic book that I own, like book series. Like there's 10 main ones and then there's 2 bonus ones. But it's just yeah, man, it's just the Sandman, dog. Like I don't know what to say, man. Go ahead and read a better summary. I'll do better videos, more expanded videos, but it's just a very solid, mysterious, creative. This is probably the most creative book that I own. And the Lucifer from the Lucifer TV series, he comes from the Sandman. Like Lucifer, like leaving hell, that happened in the Sandman books. And if you watch the Lucifer credits on Netflix, you'll see Neil Gaiman. Who are the other guys? Sam Keith and Mike Dringenberg and Malcolm Jones III. Like you'll see that in every single Lucifer opening credits. You'll see that created by Neil Gaiman and these guys, because it comes from this story. Like that's how deep, how dense the Sandman is. Like even one small part of the Sandman was enough to create an entire Netflix show that lasted like 5-6 seasons. Like, bruh, Sandman is just, this is Dream. He's the prince of dreams, and it's just about I'm not gonna spoil what it's about, but it's just very creative, and the artwork is just, hey, this is Scott Free. That's Mr. Miracle. Mr. Miracle actually makes an appearance here, which is crazy. So that'll do it, guys. That'll do it. This is my comic book collection, man. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's so yeah. I'll do videos on every single one of these books in depth, I think, if I get motivated to do so. But otherwise, you've seen my favorites. That is my top book. Saga is a must read. Yeah, man, I don't know what to say. Now I'm keeping you here hostage, but yeah, thank you for watching.